G'day and welcome back for another Space Engineers tutorial. Today we're going to be building a farm, but not just a farm. We're building a farm that has an auto harvester. We're building a farm that will let you know when it's running low on water, which means we're going to be messing with pistons, with hinges, with broadcast controllers, with a whole bunch of new blocks that we haven't messed with in the building of this base so far. And this base has been built in the previous tutorials. We've made our algae farms, we've made our mining ship, we've made our refinery, assembler, all of this stuff has been built in the previous videos, so if you want to catch up to where we're at, you can go and have a look at those. But today what we're going to be doing is, as I said, building a farm. To begin with, let's have a look at the farm block. If we open our block menu and we search for food, we can add the food processor with this little plus symbol to our hotbar, and then scroll through to find the farm plot. The farm plot looks like this. It's got the dirt on top, it's got grow lights, which means you do not need to worry about where the sun is, and you do not need to have access to the sun for this to grow crops. However, I'm still going to build it with glass because it looks nice, but you do not need any light whatsoever for this to function. It's got a conveyor port on the bottom because plants need water, and this is how you're going to deliver it to the farm plot. And plants also need a safe environment in which to grow. And for most of the planets in Space Engineers, that is a variable. It's safe sometimes, but not all the time. That means we're going to need to make sure that our farm plots are in a fully enclosed, airtight environment, so that we can protect them from the weather. Airtightness in Space Engineers has its quirks, so we'll be going through a few of those as we go. To begin with, what I'm going to do is build a bit of a pathway to where we're going to build this platform so that we can keep this base looking a bit more interesting. Like I've said before, building in a bit of space, expanding things does tend to make it easier to make something look nice. So to build this bridge, get rid of these. We'll replace them with our reinforced conveyor tubes, making sure that they're aligned correctly. And we want to change back to the white-ish color that we've been using. So while the block is snapping to that white, we're going to press Shift P, and that will grab that color. And then we can place these down. And I'm basically just going to build out a bit of a bridge here. And to keep it looking a bit more interesting, I'm going to raise this up another block. Add a little bend in here so that our view from our greenhouse ends up looking out over our kind of pleasant to look at ice lake. As mentioned, farms need to be protected from the weather, so we're going to add an extra couple of blocks to this bridge to allow us to have room to put an airlock down. The airlock we're going to be using today is a very simple one. What we're going to do is find in our block list here the door. We can add this one with the plus so that we can see all the different types, but the type we're going to be using is this sliding door because it's the simplest one to use and the one that is the easiest to ensure we have maintained an airtight space. So we'll place one door this way with the doors facing into our space and one this way. And that's why we need those two blocks there. Then we need to build our platform and start planning out the conveying to pipe up to our farms. I'm going to give us a little bit of room in front of the door and then a row to walk in front of the farms. And then I'm going to place a row of conveyor junction blocks. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then have another gap with some armor blocks. The reason it's 4 is that's as far as our auto harvesting setup is going to be able to reach. So we'll go another 4 on this side, giving us a total of 8 conveyor blocks, which means 8 farm plots later on. Now that we have our conveyor junctions, we can place our farm plots on top, lining them up whichever way you like. I kind of like that they look like a nice long tray if I place them this way, so that's how I'm going to orient them. Now that we have these farm plots, we can interact with one to see a bit more information about them. And when you do this, you will see their water level and the current crop type on the window over here on the right. On the left, if you have any seeds, you will be able to select them to plant. We don't have any seeds, so that means it's probably a good time to go out and forage for some. Foraging for food in Space Engineers is genuinely difficult, but I'm going to show you some examples of where you can find fruit, vegetables, grain, and mushrooms within a short distance of our home base. Here is an example of fruit. You will see plants like this, where you can interact with them as you'll see this yellow highlight. There are some examples that look a bit like these, as you can see on screen right now, that unfortunately do not bear any fruit, but these fruit trees you will usually be able to spot at a bit of a distance because the way the light behaves with them is a bit different to the rest of the plants around them. You can see they've got that kind of almost dark edge on the side closest to the sun, which is a little bit odd, but you know, it is what it is, and it helps us identify these. So we're going to pick that with F, and now if I open my inventory, you can see fruit. There it is. This we won't be able to plant directly, but we will be able to convert to its seeds when we get back to base. But let's go have a look at the grain next. This grain here that looks a bit like wheat. It's a lot easier to spot when it's in the green grass. When it's in the yellow grass, it can be tough. But this is grain right here. And here we can see an example of the vegetable plant. And the next one that we need to find, and the final one, is some mushrooms. And yep, here we go. Finally found some. These are really tough to spot at times, but the mushrooms will appear on a log like this. Please don't feel bad if you are struggling to find these things. They are really difficult to spot. To turn the food we collected into seeds, what we need to do is access our food processor, which we can either do via this access port here or via these control panels here. Go to our inventory tab, make sure we've got show character inventory here on the left, and we can just drag them straight in. We could also drop these into any of our connected inventories, so I could have put them into the cargo container or any of the other connected inventories, and the food processor will pull it from there. We can then go to our production tab and select our harvesting tab. Over here we can then create 2 fruit seeds, since I collected 2 bits of fruit, 1 grain, 1 vegetable, and 1 mushroom spore packet. It'll then produce those, and I can go back to the inventory screen and grab those seeds out. With those in hand, we can now try and plant them. There are 2 methods for planting into your farm plots. The first is to open the farm plot with F, select the crop, click plant. The second, I can't show you just yet directly because it's not in the game, but it will be coming in the next update at the time of recording this video. The method there allows us to add seeds to our hotbar via the same G menu that we add blocks, and then if we have that seed in our inventory, we can directly click into each plot with that seed. Similarly, harvesting can be done in a single click if the plant is ready for harvest. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to plant a single fruit seed because we know this is probably going to die and we don't want to lose one of the other ones that we've only got a single example of. So we're going to plant that. It's going to tell us the progress it's got, the time it's spent growing, the crop health, the water level, and its current water usage. If we keep opening this up, it will keep updating the values. The crop health now at 96.94. If I open up again, dropped further. Fruit uses the most water of any crop at 20 liters a minute. So we need to provide some water to this. To provide water to our crops, what we need to do is build an irrigation system. The irrigation system can also be found under our food processor block, and it looks like this. It's a 2x1 size block, which we can see through. In the middle, we've got a conveyor port on one side, and we have 2 on the top. We have no conveyor ports on the bottom, and none on any of the other sides. So it's a bit of an unusual one that we have to make sure we've got conveyoring coming in from the side or from the top. I'm going to place this against the first of my doors here. So it's going to stick out over the edge. That means we're going to be able to, if we flip it around, have a conveyor port pointing out off the side. If you're having trouble getting this to place where you want it to, you can do it against the door, or what we can do, so we can add a slope block here, and then that can make it a bit easier to place. And there we go, we have our irrigation system. So this is going to need to be connected up to our base. The way I'm going to do that is by starting with a T-piece here, branching out towards the farms. We'll then go in a straight line directly over to our container, replacing this bend here with a T-piece. This next bit's going to be a bit strange. We're going to go with a bend there, one here, and then we'll go down and go under to connect to our farms. Using a T-piece on this part so that we can connect that row to this row. And once I weld this up, our irrigation system and our farm plots will be connected to our cargo system on the rest of the base. And with the conveyors piped up, our crop is dead. As expected and as planned, because I wanted to demonstrate what a dead crop looks like and what we can see from that dead crop. If you then access the farm plot with F, you can see that the cause of death was low water, and it will give you different outcomes depending on what the cause of death was, which is useful. If we want to then clear this plot to be able to use it for another crop, we need to click Harvest. Crop did not survive, the plot will be cleared and no items will be collected, and then poof, there goes the crop. So this is now ready for us to plant a new seed in. But we don't want to lose our seeds, so let's look at how we're going to use the irrigation system to provide water. The irrigation system has an inventory for ice. This is our only water storage. This ice gets directly converted into the water that is needed by the farm plots to grow the crops, but there's no water tank or anything else we can store in it. So the ice that is stored in this irrigation system is our water storage. If we have a look on our connected inventories and search for ice, you can see that there is ice in the O2H2 generator. The irrigation system will not pull this ice into itself automatically. You could manually move it like I was showing there, but as I said, it won't do it automatically. If, for example, I moved this ice to this cargo container, the ice will then be pulled by both the irrigation system and the O2H2 generator into their inventories. I think we need to go out and collect a little bit more. So I'm going to take my mining ship out and collect a nice big load of ice. So now that we've come back with the ice, we can see that the irrigation system is filling up with it from the cargo system. There's a bit of extra put into the cargo container. The irrigation system will not fill itself entirely, just as refineries don't. It fills itself to about 3/4 full. And now that it's got ice, these farm plots will show that their water level is high because they're getting water delivered to them. So now we should be good to plant our crop, right? Well, let's see. If we plant our fruit, it's going to get its water, it's going to start growing. But then we might have a bit of bad luck, where we can have a bit of bad weather with a bit of nasty hail and our fruit crop just died. So I'm going to have to go out and forage for some more fruit to replace this one that just died. But this is what we have to deal with. We're going to have to protect our crops from the weather, and we're going to have to, protect ourselves from the weather too. Stupid hailstorms. That's much better. So again, we will harvest this to clear it, and we'll wait until everything is ready properly before we do that again. So this means we need to deal with two problems. We need to deal with the weather, and we need to deal with always supplying water to our crops. The irrigation system is going to have ice in it as long as we have ice on the base, but what if we start running low? It would be really nice for us to have a warning of when we're running low, and we can set that up in an automated fashion so that we get a warning with plenty of time for us to take our mining ship down to the ice lake and collect some more. In order to set up our warning system, we need something to detect when the ice levels in our irrigation system become too low. So we need an event controller for that. So let's move to our second hotbar and search for event controller, and we'll right click to add that to our hotbar. Then we need the thing that's actually going to broadcast that things are wrong. So let's make an audible warning by adding a sound block. And it might also be nice to have this warning if we're not at home, so we need some way to broadcast that message to us. So we'll need an antenna, and we'll need a broadcast controller. We have not currently unlocked broadcast controllers. If you look at the progression tree, we can search for broadcast, and it shows up here, which will be available to us once we build the antenna. So I'm going to start with our event controller here, placing it facing this way because I think it'll be nice seeing all those buttons and lights and things from inside our greenhouse. Then on top of that, I'm going to place an armor block, and then on top of that armor block, I'm going to place the antenna. This armor block that I placed here is to help for the airtightness later, and it means we won't need to move this antenna once we've built it. You'll have two options for the antenna. You'll have a compact option and a regular option. I'm going to use the compact antenna here because I think it's going to look nicer. Then let's get these welded up, and in this case we do need to weld up this antenna first so that we can get access to that broadcast controller. But once you weld it up, we will now have access to new blocks, and we can go back to our G menu and add our broadcast controller to our hotbar. I'm going to place our broadcast controller right here with its functional parts pointing outward because I think it looks interesting, and we can place our sound block on the side here. I'm not going to place it on the front because once you see this welded up, the sound block looks like it's floating, and it looks better on the side, I think. I'll get all these bits welded up, and then we can start making this system functional. If you're like me and you've been flying around a lot and having to fill up your hydrogen bottle a lot, there are a couple of things you can do with your cargo system to make things a bit more efficient to find them. One of the things I like to do is to go to my control panel, and we'll find our tank, and our small hydrogen tank. I'm going to put at the end of its name TTT. And then similarly for my cargo container, I'm going to put CC. And wherever I decide to put my food, I'll put FF. Basically, I use any combination of letters that are right near where my left hand sits over WASD. The reason I do this is that I can access a cargo port like this and just type TTT, and it will take me straight to the tank. Because as long as the right hand side has Show Connected Inventory selected, the search bar will be highlighted when you open this port. And so search CC shows just the cargo container, search TTT shows just my hydrogen tanks. The reason it needs to be triple T, not double T, is that if it's double T, it will show you all the locations where bottles currently are. That's not really what we want. But with this up, we can just control click to put it in, Control-click to take it out once it's full, and it makes it much quicker for transferring and refilling your hydrogen bottle. When you weld up the sound block, you'll get told that you've unlocked some new blocks. None of those are relevant for today though. And there we are, we're ready to set up our warning system. So to begin with, let's access the control panel of the base and search for our event controller. Now we have two event controllers that are showing up here. One of them in white, that's the one on the base because I'm accessing through the irrigation system here, and the other one in orange, which is on our mining ship. So let's name these. Event controller miner docking, because that's what that one's used for, and this one will be event controller irrigation warning. And then conveniently, the event that's selected by default is cargo filled %, which is the one we want, but we don't want equal to or greater than. What we want is equal or less than, and we want to choose a level that is low enough that it's not going to trigger unnecessarily, but high enough that it's going to give us time to return from whatever task we're on, collect the mining ship, go collect ice, and return the ice to the base before the plants will die. I'm going to set this to 10%. This is going to give us, based on the number of farms we have and the maximum water consumption of the crop that consumes the most water, it's going to give us a bit more than 15 minutes after the warning before we need to get ice to those crops so they don't die. Now we need to make sure that we've selected the correct block to be monitoring the cargo of. So let's scroll down until we find our irrigation system, and then we click add blocks. Once you see that irrigation system is in the selected blocks, we now have this event controller monitoring it to ensure it doesn't run out. And now we can tell it to do things. So let's set up the blocks that it's going to order around. First off, our sound block. On our sound block, we can alter the volume of the block. This is how loud it's going to play, but not how far the sound is going to go. That is controlled by the range. So the volume can be very low but heard very far away, or very loud and not heard very far away at all. We probably want this to be as far away as possible. And then we can pick from our sound list what we want this to actually play. In this case, I would probably pick one of the 3 alerts, but you could have something funny like this play instead. And that gives you a warning that you've got to be quick. But in this case, I am actually going to just pick the alerts. And I'm going to pick alert 2 because it's going to allow me to demonstrate something else. When I click play, you hear it once. That's because the loop time for this track is only set to 1 second. So we want to set this to long enough that it's going to alert us, but not so long that it's going to annoy us. So if I click play now, we're going to hear that sound 3 times and then it's going to stop. That might not be long enough. Let's go 10 seconds. So there we go. The sound block will now play that for 10 seconds each time it's given the play instruction. Okay, next thing we need to set up is our broadcast controller. So we'll search for that. And one of the first things we're going to see is the broadcast target. This can be set to owner only, which is just us, or our faction, so any of the people we're playing with who we've joined a faction with. So if you're playing with friends, you can select that, or you can select it to broadcast to everyone, which is usually not a great idea. And I'm going to give it a custom name, so when it shows up in chat, it's actually going to show up with this name, not just me. So I'm going to say Irrigation System, and message 1 will be ice low, needs refill, or anything to that effect. Then we need to go to our antenna and choose the range at which this will be broadcast. And I think we can probably handle it going out to about 20 kilometers. And that's going to use 80 kilowatts of power. So we may be in a position at the end of this tutorial where we need to add a little bit of extra power to the base to manage all of the extra devices we've been adding. If you don't want to look on your HUD and see compact antenna as the broadcast, we can do one of 2 things. From the antenna, we can either change the name of the antenna or we can change the HUD text. Usually it's best to change the HUD text because then you can still find the antenna in your control panel by searching antenna. So I'm going to call this home. There we go, that's going to show up as home on my HUD. Now we can go back to our event controller, select actions, and find these blocks that we want to trigger. So with the sound block, when true for slot 1, we want it to play. And then for the broadcast controller, when true, we want it to transmit message 1. And that's it. That's all set up. And we can test this system by going to our inventory, finding our cargo container, and dragging all of the ice out. And you can hear the alarm, but we're not seeing the text on our screen. and there are two reasons for that. The first is that we are broadcasting to faction only, but we're not actually in a faction. So we can either change that over to owner only, or we can create a faction and then it will work. Similarly, we need to turn our suit antenna on, and we do that by pressing O. And now, if we go into our cargo container, use our CC that we set up before, drag our ice in, we will see split C irrigation system. Ice low needs refill. Of course, it doesn't actually because it just refilled itself, but that's okay. But now we have a warning system for our ice. That means as long as we are within range of this antenna, we will get a warning, which means we shouldn't ever run out of ice and therefore water for our crops. And with that done, we can now get working on making this space airtight to protect our crops. And the first step toward that is building an air vent. We'll go to our third hotbar, Ctrl+3, and then search for vent. I'm going to add this one with a little plus symbol, right click on that. And the vent we're going to use is going to be this air vent full block. This block has a vent on one side and then conveyor ports on every other side. It is also airtight on all sides, so we can utilize this as part of our wall of our greenhouse. The place we're going to be putting the first one is where this curved conveyor tube is right here. I'm going to grind that out and place my vent with the vent surface facing upwards, because this vent is going to be pulling in air from our local environment and compressing that oxygen into our tank. When the vent's complete, you'll see that there are 4 lights along the top. When they're yellow like this, it means that it's in a space that can't be pressurized. If we access the control panel and then select depressurize to on, we can then take a look at our tank, or our oxygen tank, and see that it's filling. If I then turn this off and search for my tank again, we'll see that it's stopped. So this vent is taking air from outside and shoving it into that tank. This will work on a number of different planets, including ones where you can't safely go outside with your helmet open, such as the alien planet. It doesn't work on all planets with an atmosphere. They need to have a small amount of oxygen in that atmosphere for it to work. So this vent is filling up our oxygen tank. We need another vent in order to pressurize our future greenhouse. So what we're going to do is we're going to place that one in here with the vent facing inward. In order to demonstrate airtight spaces in Space Engineers, I've built these experiments here, which I'm going to use to show you a few of the quirks of the system so that you can hopefully better understand it than me just guiding you through a direct build. To create an airtight volume in Space Engineers, you need to enclose that volume with airtight faces of blocks. So if you take the simple armor cube here, it has 6 faces, all of which are airtight. If we move to this slope block, its shape has 5 faces, but its cube only has 2 airtight faces. That is this face and this face. This is not airtight. This is not airtight. To demonstrate this more clearly, we can hop into our first space here. We've got a vent on depressurize, and this one's on pressurize, and you can see that it's green. On the roof, I have full glass panes. They give me the airtight faces on that surface. On the floor, I've got full cubes, and on the walls, I've also got full cubes, with the door and the vent providing the remaining walls. All of these have airtight faces everywhere they are needed, so the vent is green. If we move over to our next experiment, what we have are 2 of those sloped blocks, here and here. They are underneath 2 of these window side blocks. These window side blocks, well, they aren't airtight on any face. That means that this is showing yellow because, even though this looks visually airtight, it is not. To make this airtight, we can either replace those slopes, or we can replace these windows. If I remove these window blocks and place any block that has an airtight face down on top of this, it will make this an airtight space. So we can do that with a window. And now it will be airtight, because this window is providing that sloped face with the airtight surface. You can see the same problem with sloped blocks like this. This is a 2x1x1 base slope, and the tip, and this is not airtight. There are some quirks that work the other direction though. For example, this room is airtight. We walk through, we see the vent showing us that it is green and it is airtight, but I can walk straight out here. And that's because these sloped window blocks, they are airtight on most of their faces. So we can make airlocks that are more like force fields than doors, if we want to. I don't tend to use those because they feel a bit cheesy, but if you'd like to, go nuts. So far we've seen that blue means depressurize, Green means it's a pressurized space. Yellow means that it's a not yet or not able to be pressurized space. But there are a few other ways that these vents can display information for us. For example, if I close this door, this is a pressurizable space, so it goes green. If I then depressurize, that blue is no longer all 4, it's just down to 1 because there is now no oxygen in this space. If the room is airtight but there's not enough oxygen to fill it, it'll show this, where it'll have 1, 2, or 3 lights because it's not able to pressurize the space. Some important things to note about airtightness in Space Engineers are voxels are not airtight. You cannot use the ground to make any space airtight. You must use blocks, and they must be all part of the same grid. Airtightness is not inherited from the space around it. It is only effective at the grid level. So to give you a useful example of what that means, it means that this farm plot here, which if I right click, I can see that I've got it on the same grid as these doors, it is protected by this airtight space. This one on the end of a piston, however, is not. And you can see that it's not part of the same grid because when I access it, all of the other blocks are orange. This is on a subgrid. This will not be protected from storms. Even though it's inside this airtight space, the only airtightness that matters for it is the airtightness on its own grid. So you'd have to build another little bubble inside this bubble and have a vent on that as well. So with that all done, let's get out of creative mode and we will go back to our proper world. The first thing we're going to do to make this space airtight is we're going to add a food processor in here so that we've got a food processor right near our crops, because I think that makes a lot of sense. Not one that's hidden down in a hole over there. And we're going to place it rotated around this way. We're not worrying about where the conveyors are connecting. What we're worried about is what faces are airtight. So if we have a look at our food processor, this face, the one that's directly at our camera, is not airtight. Nor is this one. Nor is this one. But the top, back, and bottom all are. So we can utilize those faces against our air vent, which is airtight from this side, to ensure that this wall that we're creating is going to be airtight. And with that built, we can then remove this curved conveyor tube from here, replace it with a T-piece, and put a curve on there. And that means it will be piped up, and we're getting the airtightness benefits. Now we're going to start adding some armor blocks around here to begin building some supports upon which we can place our glass to make this space feel like a greenhouse, even though, as I've mentioned earlier, the glass is not required for the farms. They have their own inbuilt grow lights. So I'm going to start by placing a few blocks around here to create some nice, confidently airtight surfaces to work from. This block here is going to be the start of a bit of an arch of support armor that's going to go over the top. So we'll put a slope there. Another slope on here, and then we'll go 1, 2, 3, and then we'll slope this down, building it off the side and going down to the ground, making it look like this might be some superstructure that's supporting the building. Next, we'll place a couple of blocks here, match the shape from here on to the other frame that we've already put down, and then I'm going to build a support structure over the entryway as well. So slope down here, but I can't build this as a full block on top of our vent here, because then it won't have access to any air. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use a half light armor block and leave a gap like that, and then put a 2x1 slope here and a slope on here, which gives us a bit of asymmetry, which can be quite nice, and it's stylistically cohesive with what's there. And then just to cover up these last little bits, 2x1 slope there, and a slope tip there and there. I'll get this welded up, and then we're going to look at our mounting point for our auto harvester. And once we've built that, we're going to fill this with glass and ensure that it's airtight. Our auto harvesting rig is going to be built down this end. What we're going to do is add a full block here, full block here. We can continue these down to the ground if you'd like to match the other ones that we've done. Full cube on top. And then this shape will get a little bit interesting. We'll go with a slope there, another slope on the inside of it, another slope like this, and then a full cube in between. Then in between these slopes down below, we are going to place a conveyor junction. And it does need to be a conveyor junction here because we need something that's airtight. And this provides airtightness on all of its faces. Then we can connect this over to our container over here to ensure that we have cargo hookup like so. I'll get this welded up, and then it's time for the glass. And before the glass, do make sure that you have welded up all of the blocks that are part of this platform, because if one of these armor blocks is not welded up, it will not be airtight. So now we need to place the windows. Let's have a look in our block menu, and we don't have access to them. What do we need to make to get access to them? So the window blocks are all in this section here, and they require us to make a single interior wall. So I'll add that to my hotbar, grab the parts for this, middle mouse, place this down, weld it up. I've now unlocked windows. We can grind this down and get rid of it. Now we're going to open up our block menu, scroll down, find this row of windows, and we're going to add the window 1x1 flat and the window 1x1 face. These will contain all of the blocks that we need to make this space airtight. You can use different window shapes if you want, but these are the ones I'm going to be using today. When I'm building windows for a space that I want to put stuff inside of, I try my best to put the windows on the outside. By that I mean, where this window is right now, that surface that it's making airtight, this block can be either here or here. And I would prefer it to be on the outside because I'm unlikely to put something else out there. But if I put it on the inside, I may block my ability to put down a light later, and that could get annoying. So we'll place these ones on the outside here. Then we're going to go for the ones on the top, and we'll start at this slope because I can't place this one here right now. There's nothing to attach it to. But if I start from here, I can build back towards the antenna and cover this area. So that's why I find these structural supports really helpful, because they give you more points you can attach your windows to and also break up the large area of glass. So if you use these wisely, they can really help you be able to fill out a space with glass while having everything remain airtight and work properly for you. And now for this part, we're going to use these slopes. As we noticed before, these slopes have a lot of airtightness sides on them, so they'll be able to provide our airtightness against these corner armor blocks. And then we'll go down to here, making sure we're placing this on the outside, and I'm going to try my best to keep the tinting on the outside too. We have window 1x1 flat, and we have window 1x1 flat inverted. The difference between these two blocks is where the tint is. For the flat, it shows into the cube that it's occupying. For the inverted, it shows out of the cube that it's occupying. So in this case, I want it this way. Don't worry if you mess these up, you can always fix them after you've welded them by just grinding it out and replacing it with the one that you need. So that's our middle section. Now let's go on to this section. So we're going to have two more slopes here, a window flat there and there, another slope on there. Put our flats on the roof. I need more girders. Now on these corners, we can use our window 1x1 face to fill in the gap there. Another one here, then put our slopes down. And for our remaining two holes, this section here and this section here, we could just simply place our windows down like this on the inside. Or we could use a little technique that allows us to place them on the outside, letting us put things like desks and beds against those windows. And that trick involves using some very small blocks that can kind of be hidden. If you have the DLC, you can use the neon tubes down, which is a very small piece and looks like a bracket when we don't actually build it up, which is quite nice. But if you don't have the DLC, we still have a few other options. We can use plate, and we can place it against this block, which will give us an attachment point upon which we can place the windows, or we can use corner lights. And that's what I'm going to use here, just to do something a bit different. And we can place a corner light on our armor blocks down here. We can't place it on these slopes. There's no attachment point for that, but we can place it down here, so we can place one there and one there. And that's going to allow us to place these glass windows like this. And there we go. I'm not going to weld up these corner lights. I'm just going to leave them as they are, as a little bit of a frame supporting that window. We can do the same around this side. Put down those as little supporting frames. And then we can place our windows on top. And that should be all the windows we need for those two sections. We can continue it down here. And we'll follow the same sort of shape to fill in the holes. And then we finally come to our last surface, which is this part here. Because of this conveyor tube, we cannot have all of our windows on the outside. So I'm going to place them all on the inside. The reason for that is I like to try and avoid this little step that happens in the window if I can. If I have to have the step that happens because I've put the windows on two separate layers, so be it. But if I can avoid it, I will. And there we go. Let's get all this welded up and see if that turns from yellow to green. And this should be the last two windows. And now we should be airtight, but obviously the airlock doors are open, so let's close those. And look at that, we're airtight. And now if we want to grow crops, we can, because we know they're going to be safe from any bad weather. So I'm going to plant all of my crops. And I'll go out and get some more fruit so that we can plant some more of that too. Now that we have all of the crops in these farm plots, we can take a look at the differences between them. If we start with our fruit crops, you can see that it uses 20 liters of water per minute. If we then go to our grain crop, it's 16. Our vegetables, 15. And our mushrooms, 8. The mushrooms are the fastest to grow, followed by the vegetables, followed by the grain, and lastly the fruit. So while these are growing, let's get building on our harvesting system. So we're going to need a few blocks for this. If we open up our block menu, search for piston, we can add that to our hotbar. Also, search for hinge, add that to our hotbar. And finally, search for collector and add that to our hotbar. So let's start building this. To begin with, we want to place a piston directly on that conveyor port because it needs to convey the crops that it harvests back into our cargo. Then off this, we're going to place a hinge. And we need to use a hinge here because we need to convert from large grid to small grid while remaining on the same conveyor system. The reason for that is the collector block. We need this collector block to get really close to these farms in order to collect the crops once they're grown. And the large grid collector, it's big and it has its collection face there and a port on the back. So if we were to use this and use some other pistons to get this at the right height and do things like that, the whole farm would need to get so much larger. But if we swap, and if I click 8 again, you can see the small grid version. This is much more compact and also has conveyor ports on all of its sides with the collection down there. So that's going to be a lot easier to set up. So what we're going to do is we're going to place this hinge on here and we're going to rotate it so that it could move up and down. It's going to move just straight down and just sit there, but it's mostly going to be there for converting to the smaller grid. So we place that on there, get out our grinder, and make sure when we're looking at this hinge that we see hinge part on the right. And then we grind that out. Now we can go into our control panel, search for hinge, select it, and we can see that on a large grid hinge, you've got 3 options of hinge heads to add. You've got add hinge head, which is just the regular large grid one that we just removed, or you've got medium head, which is a 3x3 conveyor ended hinge head, or you've got small, which is the 1x1. We want the medium one here because I think it's going to look best. It's still small grid, so it's still going to work for our purposes. And then we'll get these welded up. When you're welding up pistons and hinges, it's very important to make sure you weld up both parts if you want things to be able to convey through them. Here, I have not yet welded up this piston part, so I need to make sure that is fully welded up, and this hinge part is also fully welded up. And now we can set this up to build our harvesting array. What I'm going to do is come back over here, get into my control panel, find the hinge again, and we're going to move this down so it's facing directly downward. The way we're going to do that is by adjusting its velocity. If I scrub to the right here, that's going to go up. We don't want that. We want it to go down. So I'm going to scrub left, wait till it's all the way at the bottom. And then we can either just leave it like that, because that'll keep pushing it back if it ever gets bumped. Or we can set it back to 0 by right-clicking on this bar, which resets to 0. And there we go, that's facing downward. And now we're in a good situation to look at why we only built 4 farm plots in a row, and it's because of this piston. Large grid pistons have a maximum extent of 10 meters, which means 4 large grid blocks because each one is 2.5 meters a side. So if I were to reverse this velocity to make it extend, it's going to extend out, and the position of where these collectors will be will reach as far as these 4th plots and no further. So that means if we wanted to extend more farms, we would need to put another piston stacked on top of this or figure out a different system to place the collector in the right position. So let's get on to building these collectors and the conveyors we need to connect them up. Now we need to bring up our conveyors and place a conveyor frame, which is a small grid only block. So we'll place that on there. Then we'll place a large conveyor junction like so. And on the sides of this conveyor junction, we're going to put down another conveyor frame each way, and then we'll place down our collectors. When you're placing this collector, make sure that the collection face, which is this funnel thing here, faces downward, and that these large ports are aligned to our conveyor frame there. So if you're looking at the conveyor frame, you should be able to see a large port because there are large ports on opposite faces and small ports on the remaining 2. So I'll place one there and one here. And you can see now that these are pretty well perfectly at the right height for these farm plots. The crops are still going to take a little while to grow, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some button panels to control that piston. So we'll search for button, right click on that, and And I'm going to add one of these button panels to the end of each row, because I think they kind of look nice at the end of these rows of plants. But we're going to use these buttons to control our piston. To set up these button panels, what you need to do is hover over one of the buttons and right click on it. You can left click on empty ones, and this will also work, but right click means you won't activate it if there's something already set on that button. And then we need to search for a piston. We only have one on our base, so it's easy to know which one it is. And I'm going to set it up to extend. And then if I click this button with left click, we should see that the harvester is going to slide its way along the crops. And if any of these were finished growing, it would be collecting them, but they're not yet. But we've still got more to set up, so they've got time to grow. When this reaches its full extension, we could either set up another button to send it back, or we can go and set up another event controller for watch for when this is at its full extent and send it all the way back. So let's go do that. I'm going to sit it just above this door here, like this. Make sure you're careful when you do things like this that remove the air tightness for your greenhouse. Don't do that in the middle of a storm. There we go, event controller built. Now we can go into our event controller and we're going to set this up to event controller harvest piston retract. We're going to find the event called piston position percent. And we're going to select equal or greater than 100. So that means full extent. And it's going to be watching the only available piston. And we're going to select actions. We're going to do piston. And when it reaches that, what we want it to do is retract. So that's all set up. Now we need to actually make this event trigger. Because this piston is already at 100%, the event can't be triggered by it just sitting there. It needs to change to 100%. So what we're going to do is go and find our piston. I'm going to hit reverse. Then I'll hit reverse again to extend it out. And we should see that when it hits the end, it will automatically retract now. And it'll go all the way back. Our mushrooms were fully ready to be harvested, and they've been collected by our harvester. If we check our inventory system now, we should be able to find some mushrooms. And there we go. We have 3 mushrooms in our large cargo container. So we can now convert these back into seeds by going to our production window, finding our food processor, harvesting. We've got 1 spot available for seeds, so I'll make 1 set of seeds, pop these in my inventory, and I'll go plant them. And I've waited around for a bit over half an hour till these crops could grow so that we can harvest them all at once. Our vegetables have grown. These grow at a minimum time of 20 minutes, and once they're fully grown, they use 1.5 liters per minute, so it's 1/10 of the water usage they use when they're growing. Same with grain, it's 1/10. It's 1/10 with all of the crops once they're finished growing. The grain, however, has taken much longer to grow, and then if we look at our fruit, it's taken even longer again. So let's harvest this all by pressing our extend of our piston, and it should collect all of these crops as it goes along. So then it's automatically retracted and back to home. If I want the piston to move a bit quicker, I can. If we go to our piston and find our velocity here, we can set the velocity to, say, -2. So that's going to go 4 times as fast. Now if I hit the button here, we can see piston goes along and then it goes back. So that's going to be a much quicker harvest when we're ready to do so. And now I can go and make some seeds, and then I can plant all my crops again. So now I've planted all my crops again, we can set up an automated harvesting system. Now we know that we can run this over our crops and it doesn't cause any damage. So what we can do is we can just periodically extend that piston so that it collects the crops when they're available. And to do that, all we need to do is set up a timer block. What we're going to do is remove this armor block here, go to our 4th hotbar for yet another set of blocks, and we'll find timer block in our block menu, and we'll place one here. This doesn't look airtight, but it actually is, so we can place it in here as part of our wall, weld it up, and then go to our control panel. Search for timer block, find it here. We're going to leave the delay at 10 seconds. We're going to set up our actions. We're going to find piston. We're going to set it to extend. We know this is automatically going to retract itself because of the event controller we set up, so we don't need to worry about that side of things. And then for our second action, we're going to search for timer, and we're going to find this timer block and select start. What this means is when the countdown ends, the timer will trigger itself to start its countdown again, which means every 10 seconds, it will tell the piston to extend and it will start another countdown. Tell the piston to extend, start another countdown. So now all we need to do is click start. And in 10 seconds, that piston is going to extend, retract, and then in another 10 seconds, it'll do it again. And so none of these crops will be sitting around using up water while they're fully grown. They'll get harvested very shortly after they are fully grown. Now, because I set this to 10 seconds as the trigger time, this is going to be constantly moving. As the piston is currently set to move at 2 meters per second, and it moves 20 meters, that's going to take it 10 seconds, so it's just going to be constantly moving, which I think looks kind of cool. But if you want a safety setup so that this doesn't cause troubles, what you can do is find your button panel here, search for timer, have an option to turn it off, or even search for piston and have an option to turn it off. So if I wanted this not to extend and retract again, I can turn the timer block off and it'll sit there, turn it back on, and when the countdown finishes, it'll reset and send it out again. One of the very nice things about having finished this system is we can now make some better food. Before we do that, let's make 1 seed of each type so that we've got a backup, so we don't end up spending more than we should. And I think we can make ourselves a curry. Go to our inventory, grab that. I'm going to add this to my hotbar by going to my block menu, finding food items, and dragging this down here. And then I can eat my curry and get a lot of fill from one single meal. With the greenhouse building mostly finished, I've done a few extra little touches around here. I've painted my path back in. I've used the little corner pieces to do the corner around there, removed the one that was here. I've removed the food processor that was over here since we don't really need 2 of those. And inside the farm, I've added a few details to our auto harvester, painting the conveyor frames dark grey, and adding these conveyor caps to the sides of the collectors, which I think just adds a bit of extra colour and detail. One last thing to do is to make this timer block stop beeping in our ears. Find the timer block and check silent. A fun little thing you can do with these farm plots is you can change the light that they have on them, because they actually are a light as well. So you can reduce their radius and you can change the color to something like this, where it then kind of almost looks like a UV light. Gives a bit of that feel anyway, which gives us a bit more color to this space. I've added some lights to the ceiling so that when we're at nighttime, we can see around the place. At the time of recording, Keen have no mechanism nor any plans to make any mechanism for automated planting. So that's still to be done by hand. Especially given how new farming is, if you've got any tips and tricks you'd like to share, I'd love to hear them. If you've got any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. And between now and next time, I'm going to add an extra power tower to the base to power all of this sort of stuff. And then we're off to space. So I will see you then.